Good morning, everyone. My name is Constantine Brown, and I welcome all representatives of the press and our guests to our press conference, Open the ECB Black Box. Today, we would like to inform you about our campaign for document access regarding a legal study of the ECB. And these two gentlemen here launched this campaign, and I will introduce you over there, Mr. Yanis Varoufakis, Professor of Economy and former Greek Minister of Finance. And to my right, Fabio Masi, member of the European Parliament and in the Committee of Economic and Monetary Affairs and Vice Chair of the Inquiry Committee on the Panama Papers. We will start with Mr. Masi. I'm talking approximately 5 minutes, and after that, Mr. Varoufakis will also speak about 5 minutes. And after that, we have time for your questions. So I'll give the word now to Mr. Masi.
Thank you very much, Konstantin. And I will probably speak in the language of Mr. Schäuble because I wanted to ensure that Yanis feels home here when he comes to Brussels. So if you need a translation, Yanis, I gave it to you. Ja, guten Morgen an die Vertreterinnen und Vertreter der Presse. Wir sind heute hier zusammengekommen, weil wir Sie über eine Initiative informieren möchten, die Yanis und ich gemeinsam auf den Weg gebracht haben. Es geht darum, dass die Europäische Zentralbank die griechische Regierung zwang, auf dem Höhepunkt der sogenannten Verhandlungen der Troika neue Kredite auf alte Schulden zu türmen und mit der verheerenden Kürzungspolitik fortzufahren. Und sie haben das dadurch gemacht, dass sie in verkürzter Form den Banken den Geldhahn zugedreht haben. Und die Europäische Zentralbank war sich offensichtlich nicht sicher, ob diese Maßnahme legal war. Denn wie wir herausfinden konnten, hat sie von einer privaten Anwaltskanzlei eine Rechtsgutachten in Auftrag gegeben. Und in diesem Rechtsgutachten ging es um die Frage, ob die Europäische Zentralbank ihr Mandat überschreitet, ja verletzt, wenn sie die Geldpolitik, also die Geldversorgung etwa der Banken, verknüpft mit konkreten wirtschaftspolitischen Maßnahmen wie der Kürzung von Löhnen oder Renten bzw. dem Memorandum. Ich habe daraufhin als Europaabgeordneter angefragt bei Herrn Draghi und um die Zustellung dieses Gutachtens gebeten, und er hat dies verweigert. Und vor diesem Hintergrund haben wir uns jetzt vereinbart, dass wir eine große Informationsfreiheitsanfrage an die Europäische Zentralbank stellen werden. Diese Anfrage wurde innerhalb von einer Woche von etwa 25.000 EU-Bürgerinnen und Bürgern unterstützt. Wir werden die Kampagne fortführen bis zum 60. Jahrestag der Verträge von Rom. Wir haben für diese Kampagne prominente Unterstützerinnen und Unterstützer gewinnen können, darunter etwa 2 französische Präsidentschaftskandidaten. Von meiner Seite Jean-Luc Mélenchon, von der Seite von Yanis Varoufakis hat sich Benoît Hamon zur Unterstützung bereit erklärt. Wir haben Gesine Schwan, die Yanis Varoufakis eingebracht hat, Sarah Wagenknecht, die Fraktionsvorsitzende der Linken im Deutschen Bundestag, und zahlreiche prominente Akademikerinnen und Akademiker, darunter zum Beispiel der gute Freund von Yanis, James Galbraith, der Sohn des ehemaligen Kennedy-Beraters, ebenso wie Jeffrey Sachs. Ich will es hierbei belassen. Yanis wird Sie jetzt informieren über seine Beweggründe, über die weiteren Ziele der Kampagne. Und ich freue mich im Anschluss auf Ihre Fragen. Vielen Dank.
In June 2015, the European Central Bank's Governing Council made its decision. It was a second decision, following one in February of 2015, that contributed to the closure of the Greek banks. A year later, we had the Brexit referendum. Since then, the European Union has entered into a period of deconstruction. The current debates about variable geometries and about the way in which the European Union, let me be blunt about it, can be saved, if it can be saved, concern the future of Europeans. Those decisions by the European Central Bank in 2015 and the closure of the Greek banks will go down in history as significant. Allow me to say that, yes, Europe is today beginning to have the conversation that we should have had some time ago about the future directions of Europe. But it should be disconcerting to all European citizens that instead of looking at the heart of the problem, at the dynamic which is in the foundations, buried within the foundations of Europe, the dynamic which is disintegrating Europe, and that is the crisis of the monetary union of the Eurozone. Instead of discussing ways and means of overcoming the political, social and economic disintegration at the heart of Europe, at the euro, we are trying to create new problems which to solve through the discussion of moving in directions of enhanced cooperation. Let's by all means move in that direction, but let's first solve the problem which is disintegrating Europe, the Eurozone. The European Central Bank, which is the only serious institution of the Eurozone, has exorbitant power compared to any other central bank in the world. It has a capacity, as it happened in June of 2015, to close down all the banks of a member state. That is exorbitant power. At the same time, it has a charter which supposedly grants it complete independence from politics. And yet, there is no central bank, at least in the West, which has less independence from the political process than the European Central Bank has. Remember, the complete reliance of Mario Draghi, the President of the European Central Bank, and its Governing Council on decisions of an informal group of finance ministers called the Eurogroup. There is complete dependence by our central bank that has this exorbitant power on decisions by an organ of the European Union which doesn't exist in European Union treaties. You only need to state this to realize the malaise that lies buried deeply into the foundations of the Eurozone. And let's face it, it is the Euro crisis which is causing the European Union to be at an advanced stage of disintegration. In June 2015, when the decision by the Governing Council led to the closure of the Greek banks, it is apparent that the President of the European Central Bank did not feel that he was on solid legal ground in proceeding with the closure of the Greek banks. We know this because we know that on the 18th of June, he commissioned a legal opinion from a private law firm on this matter. We want to read that legal opinion. We want you to read that legal opinion. It is a legal opinion about the extent to which the European Central Bank can be independent of the Eurogroup and its political priorities. It is a legal opinion on whether exorbitant power bestowed upon the European Central Bank can be made compatible with democratic process and with the independence of the European Central Bank. Exorbitant power without transparency, without your right, the right of Europeans, to have access to legal opinions that were commissioned with their money. This combination of exorbitant power and lack of transparency does not comply with the basic requirements of democratic processes and liberal democracy. We have therefore begun a campaign of gathering support from academics, from politicians and from European citizens that has a very simple purpose. to throw light into legal opinions commissioned by European institutions, which European citizens must have access to before they form an informed opinion about processes which are, as we speak, disintegrating the European Union. We have support from many different political families within Europe. Fabio mentioned some. Allow me also to make some references to Benoît Hamon, the Socialist Party presidential candidate in France, from Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the left party's candidate in France, from Katja Kieping in Germany, from Gesine Schwan, good friend and twice the SPD's candidate for the federal presidency in the Federal Republic of Germany, from Jeffrey Sachs, my great colleague from Columbia University, John Kenneth Galbraith, Gustav Horn, Aidan Regan from Dublin, Joseph Vogel from Humboldt University, Arthur Gibson from Cambridge University. This is a crucial small step, giving access to Europeans to have an informed basis on which to judge the actions of a supremely powerful and at the very same time supremely powerless European Central Bank is a very important step in the direction of the conversation that Europeans should be having about the process which is, as we speak, threatening democracy and integrity in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabio and Yanis. We now have time for your questions, and I would ask you to give me a sign if you have a question. And as you are a journalist here in Brussels, you probably know the game. We would, of course, like you to introduce yourself very briefly. Which media are you from, and what's your name? So, please, your questions. You first, please.
Tom Eigert, German Press. Did you go to the courts to getting these papers?
No, we are right now in the stage of collecting signatures for a freedom of information request. It is not required to collect those signatures. We could have done it on our own, us two, or one of us. But we said we want the broad support of citizens because the European Central Bank is their institution. It's basically even funded with taxpayers' money. And hence we are now collecting signatures and we will launch a freedom of information request. The European Central Bank will have approximately 15 days, I believe, to respond. And if they then continue to not release the study, then we are considering going to court, and we have the support of an eminent legal expert, Professor Andreas Fischer-Lescano. He's well known in Germany because he could prove that the former Minister of Economics, Germany, Gutenberg, had plagiarized his PhD, so he's quite well known. He's also an expert on European law, and he has prepared a legal opinion on the refusal of the ECB to publish their legal opinion, and he's quite convinced that we have a good chance of winning. And certainly the significance goes far beyond Greece. It's about Ireland, it's about Cyprus, it's about whether the European Central Bank is entitled to interfere into democracy via their monetary policy, and at the same time we know that the job of the central bank is to provide liquidity, money to the economy, to supervise banks, but not to shut them down in order to force the government to cut pensions or wages.
Allow me to make the important point. This is not about a confrontation with the European Central Bank. To your question, are we making this a legal case? as Fabio said, we are approaching this consensually. We asked Mario Draghi to release the legal opinion. He gave us a response on the basis of confidentiality that he wasn't going to. We took a legal opinion from Professor Fischer-Lescano that is not a sound legal defense of not releasing the document. Now we are in the process of alerting European citizens to this lack of transparency and to the fact that the European Central Bank clearly feels that they are on very thin and brittle ground, and therefore they went outside the legal department of the European Central Bank to seek a legal opinion from a private law firm. We believe that Europeans should be given an opportunity to ask their central bank, the European Central Bank, to share the contents of that legal opinion, because it is a very important matter for every man, woman and child on this continent, to know the limits of the exorbitant power of the European Central Bank, to know how its independence can be preserved from the Eurogroup. We are asking Europeans to join, not necessarily to agree with Fabio or with me in our assessment of the legality of what the European Central Bank did, but to simply demand their right to read that legal opinion. And we are asking everyone to sign the petition. Please do so by visiting diem25.org, diem25.org, signing the petition to open the European Central Bank black box, because unless we do, we are not going to be in a position to have the conversations that we Europeans must have to avert the process of disintegration that has very substantial human, social and political costs for the whole of Europe.
Thank you. Any further questions? Please give me a sign. Yeah.
Björk Smith-Meyer from Politico. Just to sort of understand the technical aspects of this, so you guys then go over to the ECB with this petition, and then the rules, what in the treaties state that they have to answer within 15 days? Is that how it works? If you could just explain some of the mechanics of this.
Well, we don't have to physically go there. We will just compile a letter, which maybe with a nice cover we sent to Mr. Mario Draghi. No perfume in the letter, just hopefully many more signatures by the citizens. And then we will basically ask to take charge of the further steps and represent those citizens in the further legal process. We might go to visit the European Central Bank, even personally. Let's see whether Mario wants to welcome us there. We are also in talks with people inside the ECB working there. ECB trade union might be inviting us. It's not to be said yet. And these 15 days are basically the period foreseen in the regulations for transparency of European institutions. The European Central Bank may extend that period if they give a reasonable response as to why they could not deliver a response within 15 working days. And then I think we have roughly 2 months to file a complaint in court. And these complaints usually can take up to 2 years. As some of you might know, that I have sued the European Commission over access to documents from the Code of Conduct Group on corporate taxation. And there I'm running this lawsuit now for roughly 1 year. But 2 years is a reasonable time frame where we could expect a decision by the court, but we are patient. We can wait. We just hope that the euro will not have broken down until we get a decision by the court, because there's a serious risk it might, if you look, for example, to the developments in Italy. A further comment, just quickly. DiEM25 has compiled 8 pages background paper. It has some excerpts from the legal opinion of Professor Fischer-Lascano and basically describes what this whole issue is about, and you will find it at the entrance and even online if you want to do further reading.
Thank you. You, yes?
Good morning, Minister. Irini Kostaki from New Europe newspaper. Are you still avoiding to accept that you signed the legal act that imposed the capital controls in Greece? I mean, apart from this transparency procedure that I suppose that you could carry out without the signatures, as you said, will you tell the journalists at the end that you signed also for the banks to close in Greece?
I signed the death certificate. I did not commit the murder. It is very simple. On the 27th of June, the European Central Bank made a decision which ensured that on the following Monday morning, the banks would run out of cash. In other words, that the banks would close. It was a decision of our government that given that the banks would close anyway on Monday morning because of the decision of the European Central Bank, that they shouldn't open in the first place to avoid civil unrest and to avoid putting bank clerks in harm's way and making depositors enter branches of their banks that had no liquidity as a result of the European Central Bank's decision. This campaign of misinformation, that somehow it was the victim's fault for the fate that was imposed and inflicted upon the victim, is a very interesting comment on the way in which some of the media have failed to come to terms with what really matters. And what really matters is that we have a central bank, which is very unique in the history of central banks. It is the only central bank ever that does not have a government behind it. And we have governments that don't have a central bank behind them. So this incongruity in the way we have created the European Central Bank has created a very difficult situation. And that difficult situation manifested itself in Greece in 2015 with the European Central Bank Governing Board choosing, for reasons that can be debated, to shut down the Greek banks. Whether the finance minister did or did not sign the legal document by which the branches did not open on Monday morning is utterly irrelevant.
Let me just briefly say that I remember very well, because now we have election campaigns in Germany, we have the whole debate around the rise of Mr. Schulz in the opinion polls, and I think maybe the mystery behind his success is that people don't know him in Germany, so it's always safer for Social Democrats if they have a candidate that people don't know at home. But Mr. Schulz and as well Mr. Juncker made a comment in the European Parliament or in the press prior to the referendum in Greece, which was basically an end to austerity and a no and ohi in the referendum, and the membership in the Eurozone would be irreconcilable. Well, we want to find out whether this is really true, because if the legal opinion would confirm that everything which has been done would be legal, to shut the banks down and basically say, if you don't cut pensions and wages, we shut you off from the euro, well, then I think citizens can make their own informed decision on whether this is appropriate framework for monetary union. But if not, then maybe Mr. Schulz and Mr. Juncker were wrong. And this is what we want to find out. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay. We have time for one last short question. And yeah, please go ahead.
Hi, Bianca again from Politico. This also feeds into the whole debate of just how independent central bankers should be. I mean, Yanis, you mentioned the fact that there is no government behind the ECB, but most central banks do hold a level of independence, even if there is a government behind it. I'm just curious to sort of like get your views on that a little bit. I mean, should the ECB not be so independent, or how does that work?
I do not believe this is the forum all the time to have this very interesting intellectual discussion about the merits and demerits of central bank independence. The fact of the matter is that the ECB was created to be independent, and yet it is the least independent central bank in the history of central banking. Let me make this case in terms of the June 2015 situation. For the European Central Bank to continue providing liquidity access to banks that it itself had only a few months ago deemed to be solvent, the Central Bank of Europe had to rely on the decision by the finance ministers in the Eurogroup, which does not even constitute itself as a legitimate, as a legally constituted body of the European Union. This is the great paradox. The most independent central bank in the world, supposedly, according to its charter, being completely and utterly dependent on the decision of finance ministers in a body that does not even have legitimacy according to the European Union treaties. Now, I recognize the great difficulties that that poses for members of the Governing Council of the European Central Bank and for its president, Mr. Mario Draghi. And I have no doubt that he too believes that there is a grey area there. And this is why he commissioned this legal opinion from a private law firm. The point today is that this legal opinion and this debate must be transparent. European citizens must be part of it. If they are not, you have a combination of a grey zone, of exorbitant power, and of lack of transparency. This does not augur well for European democracy.
Let me just conclude, and then we can take maybe further questions bilaterally, because we also have to release our translators. Let me just conclude by saying that, or to give you a little bit of background how this whole situation emerged. In October 2014, so prior to the election of the Syriza government, I was at the European Central Bank with a delegation by the Economics and Monetary Affairs Committee. And a member of the board of directors of the ECB told me very bluntly, well, if the Greeks decide to elect Syriza, we will basically drain the supply of euros. We will not accept anymore Greek government bonds as central bank collateral. So I asked, why? Is there not an interference in the democratic process? And their technical argument was basically, well, either you have access to the private capital markets, or you sign a memorandum and you get basically new loans on top of the old debt, a new credit card, by the other member states. Well, I then said, in the crisis in Cyprus, for example, they even accepted a fitness studio of a Cypriotic bank as central bank collateral. They basically revised the whole collateral procedure for many banks. And then they became a little bit defensive and said, well, you may have a point there, but we commissioned that legal study. This is how the whole discussion came about. And since then, we're chasing that document. Let me also say, finally, that many of our supporters, they come from a broad political camp. You will find an article there by Mr. Martin Hellwig, who is not directly supporting our campaign, but who basically brought forward the same argument as us in Handelsblatt and spoke of illegal blackmail. You have Social Democrats, Greens, a wide array of economists, but you also have people with different views on the Eurozone. For example, myself, I represent a more skeptical view on the viability of the euro, but we all agree on one issue, and this is that European Central Bank must be transparent because it has a mandate that was given to it, and if it is either forced by European finance ministers, Mr. Schäuble or Ms. Merkel, to conduct monetary policy in violation of that mandate, then we have a problem, or if it decides on its own will to basically subject democracy to the decisions of a tiny forum of central bankers, then this would be also a problem. So in any case, we need the legal opinion, Mr. Draghi, if you can hear us today.
Thank you very much, Fabio and Yanis, and I thank you for coming along to our press conference here today. I thank also our translators, and as we mentioned, maybe if you have any further short question, you can do this bilaterally, but in any case, we're happy to meet you again at another occasion. Thank you.